Well, it turns out the Pac-12 is finally dead. There is no rebuild. We take a look at this tweet. Michael Silver, I'm told Cal, Stanford, and SMU are in the process of finalizing a deal to join the ACC in football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. So it would just be those three sports, probably to mitigate the travel issues that Cal and Stanford would have. And if this does happen, which if you look at all the headlines, it seems like it's a matter of maybe hours, maybe days, but it feels like Cal and Stanford have given such a sweetheart deal, and certainly SMU, who now they're up to 7 years where they don't want any TV money, and they're going to have their boosters pay for it and cover it to join the ACC. If you are the ACC and you're trying to survive as a conference, this makes complete sense, although let's be real. Let's talk about this from a college football perspective. SMU, I'll give them credit. They are recruiting better. They're utilizing the portal. They've got the NIL funds from the boosters. They're getting a bit better. TCU cancels the rivalry games with them because they're afraid SMU's getting better. Okay, but realistically, SMU's probably a 7, an 8 win team at this point on average. And then you've got Cal and Stanford. Let's be honest, they're not bringing much of anything when it comes to college football. And that's really been the big holdup in this entire scenario. If this was 2015, Stanford University would be in the Big Ten right now. They would be so attractive. They had a good football program, good revenue. But with what has transpired in college football, with all of the NIL crap, with Stanford not wanting to participate in either NIL or the transfer portal, that has caused their program to fall off. Cal has always been bad, or at least average, I'll say. They're like a 6-6, 5-7 type team. None of these three teams are really going to up this conference in terms of college football or college basketball, let's be honest. This is more of a survival instinct move by the ACC, and now the ACC, most of those teams in that conference probably like what's going on because this does make them a more attractive conference in terms of academics while not really hurting their bottom lines because Stanford and Cal are coming in at a significantly reduced rate, probably only getting a 60% share in the first 4 or 5 years in terms of the TV deal. That's already a horrible TV deal as it is. And then on top of that, it does look like SMU, they're not getting anything for possibly the first 5 to 7 years. The other thing, if this is official, it turns out, I guess I was wrong on Stanford and the Big Ten. I guess the Big Ten, and you know what? Looking back on it, it does make sense. The Big Ten, there's really no need for them to add Stanford if Stanford's not going to bring the Big Ten anything in return outside of academics. Big Ten seems to be all right in terms of that, although there was the idea that maybe the Big Ten could look at adding Stanford and Notre Dame. If they add Stanford, that would make Notre Dame more attracted to the conference. I don't know. It does seem like Cal and Stanford, along with SMU, will be going to the ACC. And then we have to shift to what happens to Washington State and Oregon State. Washington State will need to find a new conference home soon. In a new video that was shared last week, the university president, I believe I talked about this, said that they had 3 options: join the Mountain West, join the American, or rebuild the Pac-12. The last option might have taken a blow. Yeah, so it doesn't look like the Pac-12 will be rebuilt. So Washington State and Oregon State, your 2 options. You can join the Mountain West, you can join the American. It does not seem like a merger of those 2 leagues with also Washington State and Oregon State. That does not seem likely at all right now. With only 2 schools remaining, how will the conference sell itself as an institution? Other schools would join. What conference are they talking about? Are they talking about the Pac-12 with 2 schools? It's just not a conference anymore. If they try that, they would likely need to poach schools from the Mountain West. Yeah, none of that is happening. So I will say right now, my prediction on Washington State and Oregon State is maintained that they will end up in the Mountain West. It seems like the most obvious fit in terms of the travel. Would you really sacrifice travel to make a few more $1 million going to the American? It just doesn't seem worth it to me. Although, listen, the other problem is the American just doesn't have that good of a TV deal. So even if the American has a TV deal where Oregon State and Washington State could get $9 million per year versus the Mountain West is at $7 million, is that really worth sacrificing the travel? I personally don't think so. The problem with the idea of a merger between, at this point, you're down to the Pac-2, right? Because if Stanford and Cal are gone, it's just you're merging Washington State, Oregon State, the best teams from the American, the best teams from the Mountain West. The problem with that is there's big exit fee issues, and now, even if you put together a new conference, nobody is really going to be worth that much money in terms of a big time TV deal. You're just not going to receive that. What team brings the juice in terms of the TV money? It's not Washington State. It's not Oregon State. Both of those teams, if you look at the metrics in terms of Power 5, are always at the bottom in terms of viewership, revenue, things like that. So this is an issue for those two schools, and unfortunately, they are going to have to drop down from a Power 4 conference, or whatever you want to say, Power 5, a Power 5 school. They will very likely be going to Group of 5 and likely into the Mountain West. There's also the idea, would the ACC consider... Listen, the ACC at this point is just completely unbalanced with Stanford, Cal, and SMU, especially Stanford, Cal. Would the ACC consider a West Wing 2.0 with Washington State and Oregon State to try and mitigate the travel? I don't think they have the money to facilitate something like that. I don't think ESPN, who is facilitating this move by giving the teams in the ACC some more money, it's part of an incentive. I don't think ESPN would be interested in Washington State and Oregon State joining the ACC. They just don't bring enough. At least Stanford and Cal bring academics. You could also say they're two West Coast teams that get you that window. Yes, Oregon State and Washington State are as well, but this is just an unfortunate situation where we're seeing a conference literally get cannibalized, and the two teams that, let's be honest, everyone says if you were to rank Pac-12 teams, who are the two bottom ones in terms of everything combined, it would be Oregon State and Washington State, and they're going to get left out in the cold. At least it looks like that, possibly going to the American or the Mountain West. But when you're talking about the two teams that are probably the least attractive, this is what can happen. It is, not a happy ending. It is very ugly, but I do want to say, at least at this point, it's not officially confirmed, but it's a situation where Stanford and Cal, something has to be done in terms of your 2024 schedule. It's just, you're not playing anyone right now because the Pac-12 has been completely ripped up. At least now you can join the ACC, get in a Power 4 conference. It does seem like Stanford they're not wanted, I guess, by the Big Ten, and they didn't want to join the Big 12 because of academics. If they're not able to get in the ACC, it seems very obvious Stanford was probably just going to become an independent for a year and then look for a way into the ACC if FSU and Clemson left. Or, let's remember, even just a week ago, if you want to say, oh, the vote failed on them joining, yeah, they were one vote short. So we really don't think they could get at least one more vote in the span of a year. I still think they probably would have just joined next year, but it does look like if this is true and they are joining, it had to have been the North Carolina schools that switched their vote. At least that's my initial thought. I don't see any way Clemson and FSU would budge. They want to leave that conference. They don't want more teams into it. And they would be concerned that the revenues, they want unequal revenue distribution. They don't want more teams in the conference to where you have more mouths to feed. They want less mouths to feed. They want Boston College making less because they bring in less money to the conference. They want Wake Forest making less because they bring in less money to the conference. They're not going to come out and say it, but that's the whole idea of unequal revenue distribution. Even with that model, I don't think the current TV deal that is going to be paying like $40 million per year until 2036, there's just not enough money there. Even with the unequal revenue, maybe you could get $50 million per year if you're FSU based off of incentives, but you're still going to be significantly lower than the bottom teams in the Big Ten, especially when you start talking about 2027, 2028, when the Big Ten's deal really escalates to $75 million per year, to $80 million per year. And it is an issue for FSU and Clemson, and that's why that hasn't been resolved. And the ACC is being proactive and saying, look, most teams in this conference, based off of what Stanford, Cal, and SMU are offering, the sweetheart deals, it does make sense to add these teams at this point. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.